Okay, we're here this morning with Duane Hendon, former FBA Executive Director and Chairman of this Legacy Committee project. So it's fitting that we're having some time with him this morning. So Duane, let's start by talking about how did you decide to become a band director, and what were the circumstances involved in the beginning of your career? How did you get to the career, and then how did it start?
Well, I've told this story many times, and many of you have heard it. Many of you haven't. So those of you who have, enjoy it again. But I started playing an instrument when I was in fifth grade. I would go down to the high school and take a class with woodwinds and brass with the high school band director. And when I got to seventh grade, and we were in junior high then, seventh, eighth, and ninth, I started my career in FBA as a student. And one summer, it was in 1957, Mom said, "You're going to band camp down at the University of Miami." And I said, "I don't want to go, Mom." "No, you're going, you and your brother." "Oh, do we have to?" And we spit and cussed all the way down, and she dropped us off. And this was a 5-week band camp.
Wow.
It was not a music camp, it was a band camp down on the University of Miami. So we went down there, and at the end of the 5 weeks, they had a junior high band and a senior high band. And that last week, they combined the two bands and made a banquet end of the year band of junior and senior highs. And one of the numbers that we played was the finale to Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony. Never heard it in my life. Instantly fell in love with it. And Fred McCall and he's in the Hall of Fame. He was the director of the camp, and he would almost literally come running up to the podium, jump on the podium, and give a downbeat. And off we went. Well, as a seventh grader, I do remember when you get to the recapitulation, there's like 20 measures of a B flat. I had no trouble with that. I missed a few of the 16th note runs. But so we played that, absolutely fell in love with it, fell in love with the camp. So when Mom came to get us, we said, "When is it next year?" And this is after spitting and cussing all the way down. So I went the next 3 summers and thoroughly enjoyed it. Otto Kroschar, Tom Bishop, Bill Bennett, Alton Ryan, Bill Higgins. These were all band directors who would come and give of their time for the camp. And it was wonderful. And that's what planted the seed to my musical endeavor. And I will never forget it. And I want to add as quickly as possible that my brother and I were so excited about the finale that we went to a record store and we said we'd like to have a record of the finale to Tchaikovsky's Fourth. "Well, I'm sorry, but we don't sell the finale. We just sell the symphony." "Well, whatever, we'll take it." So we took it home. We absolutely wore out the finale. And one day, and I don't remember if it was my brother or me, "Gee, I wonder what the rest of this sounds like." So we listened to the rest of it, fell in love with it. That was our introduction to classical music. And I can't tell you how important it is that band directors get a foundation in classical music. I mean, that's where our heritage started. So, and from that, my brother started buying Calmus miniature scores. Some of you don't know what they are. Some of you do. And that's how I learned how to read a score at home. And would start at the beginning, get a little ways, get lost, start the record over, turn it back to the beginning, and eventually learned how to read a score. And also learned how to conduct in our bedroom. We had a big full-length mirror on the door, and we'd stand there and conduct. And that's how I learned to conduct. So all of this before. And so the end of my junior year, my last year of eligibility for camp, and I don't even remember how it happened, but I decided to go to FSU. And that was a music camp. It wasn't a band camp. 5 weeks, Oliver Hobbs, Manley Whitcomb, and absolutely fell in love with it. I was in the band, the orchestra, the chorus, the operetta, took theory class, private lessons. It was amazing. And wow, what an eye-opener that was. And that helped me make my decision on where I went to college. So I wound up going to FSU, graduated, and that's what started. Interned with Ed Parsons at South Broward High School. Graduated in December of 1967.
So you landed back in Broward County, which you grew up in Fort Lauderdale. So did your internship there, and then what was your first teaching position, and what was it like being a baby band director?
Well, actually, when I graduated from college, I had 2 jobs waiting for me. One of them was at Norland High School in Miami, and I graduated on Saturday in December, and I started at Norland on Monday, that after the weekend.
Wow.
And it was just before winter break, and finished the year there, and that was with Jim McGonigal. He was there at the time. And Jim, bless his heart, taught me a lot about organization. He and a stickler for detail. And he knew I was only going to be there half a year. And I met Ben Godfrey at college, and he was at Cocoa Beach High School. He was a year or 2 older than I. He was at Cocoa Beach High School, and he said, "Duane, we're opening a new middle school in Brevard County out on the beach, Roosevelt Middle School. I'd like for you to come teach there." So when the half year was over at Norland, I moved up to Cocoa Beach. I taught that year at at Roosevelt. When that year was over, I was planning on coming back, and my mother worked at Stranahan High School in Fort Lauderdale. So she called and she said, the band director left, the job is open. I said, well, that's nice. And that was all that was said at the time. And things started happening in Cocoa Beach that made me think about possibly going someplace else. So I called the principal at Stranahan, and I went down and interviewed, and he offered me the job. I was shocked. So I went down there. I was there for 10 years at Stranahan.
And you really only had a year and a half experience at that point.
That's right, yeah.
So you spent 10 years at Stranahan.
Right.
And so before we talk maybe some specifics, what happened after 10 years? Something happened, you decided to leave, and where did you go next? And kind of walk us through the next part of your career.
Well, I kept listening to middle school bands at MPA. And I said, surely you can teach middle school kids to play musically. So I said, I've been here 10 years. I'm ready to change. I'd like to go give middle school a shot. So I interviewed for an assistant's job at Sunrise Middle School in Fort Lauderdale. Got the job. My wife and I took off for the summer, which we usually did. She was also a teacher, and we would get in the car and we'd be gone a couple of weeks in the summer. It was wonderful. So I came back in August and called Sunrise, and I said I'd like to come in and look at the instruments, the music, kind of get myself acclimated to Sunrise. And the secretary who answered the phone said, sorry to tell you this, but you don't have a job. We don't have enough students for 2 band directors.
Wow.
I said, well, what am I going to do?
In August.
In August. And I said, what am I going to do? She said, well, you can go back to Stranahan. I said, no, they've already hired a band director, and I don't want to go back there. I wanted to go to middle school. So here I am. August is moving on, and I have no job. Some of my friends kept calling and saying, you should go out to Coral Springs High School. I said, no, I don't want to do that. Don't want high school anymore. I want to give my hand at middle school. I interviewed a couple of places. and didn't get the job, so it kept getting closer and closer. So I called the principal out at Coral Springs. I went out there, interviewed for 2.5 hours. He took me all around the school, and he says, "The job's yours." I said, "Whoa." And I really had no intention of taking the job. I went out because I was getting desperate. I said, "Well, I need a couple of days." He said, take as much time as you need.
What year was this?
And this, oh, good Lord, I don't know, 79, something like that.
So the school couldn't have been that old at that point.
Oh, no, it had been through 3 years.
Yeah.
And so I went home and wrestled, had some sleepless nights. Any of you had those? And decided to take the job. And of course, first thing staring you in the face is marching band. So I went there and did the camp there at school. The first person that I met, the first day I drove up to school, this woman comes up to me and says, "Are you Duane Hendon?" I said, "Yes." "Well, I'm so-and-so, and I'm the sponsor of the dance team. And they're the best thing going for the band." And I said, "Could I go inside first, please?" So we got through that, and we got through marching, and it was December, really, till I started looking around saying, this is not a bad job. They got good instruments, good facilities. The parents were wonderful, which was part of why I didn't want to go. I had heard all these horror stories about fights in the band parent meetings, and I went in there, and here's a hint to young band directors. You need to let the parents know in a non-confrontal way that you were hired to do the band and that they are there to support the band. And so I took that attitude into the first meeting, and I didn't say, "Well, what have you done in the past?" I said, "Here are my goals that I'd like to accomplish this year, and this is what needs to be done. I need people to volunteer to do that." And they couldn't sign up quick enough. And through that whole time, and I was there at Coral Springs for 11 years, they were wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And the kids were wonderful. It was just really an amazing experience.
So 11 years in Coral Springs, and then what brought you to making a change at that point?
Well, I guess I need to be a little bit careful here because Marge had changed schools. That's my wife. And the school was 2 blocks away from our house. And after a couple of weeks there, or a month, she came home one afternoon and she says, "Our daughters will never go to this school." And her mother was from the Ocala area, out in the forest. And Margie's aunt and uncle had offered to sell us their house, and it just happened to be next door to Margie's mother. So I said, "Go call your aunt, let's make them an offer, and if they will accept it, we're moving." Wow. And this was in October of the last year there at Coral Springs. Another thing that I'd like to share with the young directors, you need to let everybody involved know, and I know it's not always possible, as soon as you find out that you're leaving, you need to let people know. You also need to work with your kids in the transition. And we all hear, hopefully not very often, of directors who leave even after school is out, and there's never any closure. There's never any setup for somebody coming. The administration is left high and dry. So it was February, the band parent president came into my office. She said, "I need to talk to you." I said, "Okay, sit down." She closed the door and sat down. She says, "There's a rumor going around that you're leaving." Well, there was always a rumor in February I was leaving. And I said, "Well..."
Take it as a compliment.
Yeah, right. I said, "Well, we're leaving." And I said, "I'd like to ask a favor of you. Could you give me 24 hours that I can tell the principal and my students without everything busting wide open?" So we did, and I told the students the next day, and it was tough. It was tough telling them that because I wasn't leaving actually for any other reason than my family. We moved up here because of Marge and the girls. And so we finished out the rest of the year. Melvin Maxwell took over for me, did a great job that next year. So that was good. And we moved up here. We bought the house from her aunt and uncle, moved up here, and Marge and I, neither one had a job. We had a 4 and a 6-year-old daughters, and it was a little tough. I interviewed at 2 high schools in Marion County for assistant band director, and I didn't get either job, which was a little bit hard to take. I had 21 years experience.
Yeah.
And so I interviewed at Howard Middle School here in town, interviewed with the principal, and he says, "You got the job." I said, "I need a couple of days, please." So I wrestled with that, but I didn't have a job. And so I took that job, and I was there 10 years. That's what finished out my career as a band director, 32 and a half years. And so that kind of takes you through my teaching career.
I do want to talk to you about the experience of being executive director versus teaching, but maybe we'll come back to that in a minute, because let's stay with your teaching career. So let's go in 2 different directions. First of all, let's go talk about over the 32 and a half years. What were things for you that were specific challenges, and maybe they were challenges that were consistent for you throughout your career, or maybe in one specific situation there was a challenge that you had to deal with. So whatever way, and then not only what was a challenge for you, but how did you deal with it and try to overcome it?
Well, I talked a minute ago about band parents, and I want to say something else. And again, I need to be a little bit careful here. There was a point at Coral Springs where there was a group of band parents who were very involved and very helpful and worked hard and did a lot with fundraising. So they thought, since they were so busy and helpful, that they could tell me what we needed to buy in the way of instruments. And several of their kids were in the percussion section. They wanted a new set of drums. So I said, "No, we're not ready for that." Well, they thought they'd go through the democratic process. So the way we would handle officers for band parents, and I think this is very crucial. The president of that year would call a nominating committee together, and we met in my office, and they would come up with names, and they would say, "Is this someone you can work with?" And if it wasn't, then I would say, "No, we need to keep looking," or "That'd be a great person." So we got our slate of officers together, and this group of band parents who wanted to tell me how to spend the band's money got a slate of officers together. So it came to the meeting to elect the officers. And so the slate that came from the nominating committee left. The other people who were nominated from the floor, and that's fine, left. And the floor was open for discussion, and people got up and spoke, for whatever group they wanted. And they said, "Well, is there anybody else that wants to speak?" And I raised my hand, and I got up, and I said, we spend a great deal of time choosing the officers that we think will be do the best job for the band. And I'm asking you, please, to support that group and vote for them, vote them in. And sure enough, they were voted in. And I think we averted some real problems that would have come had this other group been nominated.
Right.
That was one of the challenges that I had. There was always the challenge of music, and I know it was, I would say probably 1981 was the first year that I went to Midwest Band Clinic. Changed my life. changed my life, changed my musical life. And I went there, couldn't tell you a band that played other than North Shore with John Painter. What an experience that was. Couldn't tell you any of the high school or middle school bands, but hearing the caliber of music played and the caliber of the bands challenged me. So I went home and started being a little more challenging in my selection of literature for my groups. And it was growth from that point on. Now, did I play any grade 5s or 6s with Howard Middle School? No. But we had a wonderful time together in Coral Springs from that point on. And that truly, and I was very consistent when every year the band parents paid for it. And some of them grumbled, oh, we know what you do in conventions, you know, and obviously that was not the case, but it's wonderful. And while I'm saying that, I also encourage young directors, middle of their career, and older directors, go to the clinic in January. Go to any clinic that you can. Oh my goodness. That, I think, had more influence on me as a person, as a leader, as a musician, than anything. I used to go to Festival of Winds at UNF and NBA clinics. So I'm all for the clinics. Summer convention, January convention.
So, out of 32 and a half years, what's some kind of significant success, kind of like a high water moment for you that just stands out, that you'll always, remember as being kind of a pinnacle moment for you?
Well, just to very briefly mention it again, my going to Midwest truly changed my life. One of the more memorable performances that I had was my last year at Coral Springs and state festival, and it was down at Coral Gables, and the kids knew I was gone or going, but the growth that we made, and we played March of the Belgian Paratroopers, we played Frescobaldi's Toccata for Band, and Del Gioio's Variants on a Medieval Tune. And the growth that we made in those 3 or 4 months, getting ready for district and state, was amazing. Had Ken Williams in for a couple of days to work with the band. Had Nick DiCarbo come up from University of Miami and work the band, and a couple of other people. And that brings me to something else too, and that is you need to have people in to listen to your groups, to work with your groups. Now, whether you want them to come in and watch you rehearse and talk to you after that, that's fine. I would encourage you to have them come in, work the band, and talk with you afterwards. And you cannot wait, and this was a mistake that I made at Stranahan, you cannot wait till your band's ready. Having clinicians in helps get your band ready. And ready for what? Making music. That's what it's all about.
So, since you just ended that with making music, talk about the music making process for you and your kids, and what were the kinds of concepts and things that you were trying to instill in kids who probably wouldn't go on to be music majors, but maybe just to be lifelong appreciators of music. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, one of the highlights in that aspect was, and again, I think it was that last year I was there at Coral Springs, we did the planets, Jupiter from the planets. And many of you can relate to this. I would get up early and drive to school in the dark, and I would get to school right when it was turning light. And I don't remember which planet it is, but to the east there was a planet up there that just was so beautiful. And so one day when we were working on this, I said to the kids, did anybody see whatever it is, Jupiter, Venus, I don't know. "Did you see that this morning up in the eastern sky?" And nobody said a word, because we all know how students are and teachers at 6:45 in the morning. So we kept working on Jupiter, and of course, it's incredible. It really is incredible. I love the middle section. So not too long after that, some students came up, Mr. Hendon, we went to the CD shop and we bought The Planets by Gustav Holst. And there's more than just Jupiter. And it's just so cool. Wow, what an experience for them. And I didn't say, go buy it.
Yeah.
They were there, saw it, bought it, kind of like Tchaikovsky.
Right.
And then kids started coming in saying, Mr. Hendon, did you see Venus or whatever it is in the morning? I said, you bet I did. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing. One year we did, I think it's Prairie Overture by Ward. And this was when we were at Stranahan. So I asked the kids, let's put together, and this was back in the 70s, hello, let's put together a slideshow to show with this. Prairie. And it was incredible what they did. And it's incredible how they grew musically from it, as it was at Coral Spring.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just so much you can do out there and get these kids turned on and get them excited about music.
You know, you taught during a period of time in FBA's history where some of our icons, our Hall of Fame icons who are no longer with us,
right,
but they were teaching and you had the opportunity to get to know a lot of those people. So who was a person that kind of, you know, who was your mentor? Who took you under their wing and tried to help guide young Duane on his teaching path?
Well, I feel as though I was very lucky to wind up back in Broward County. I went to Fort Lauderdale High School, graduated in '63. Bill Bennett was my band director. Oh gosh, I can't think of his name now. Maybe it'll come to me in a minute. Was in the county. I mean, there were some wonderful band directors there. I mentioned I interned with Ed Parsons. And I was never afraid to go to them and ask them questions. I was reticent and hesitant about inviting them in to work with the kids because they weren't ready. I'm not sure when they were going to be ready. But I remember the first year, wow, we had required music back then. So our choice, I think that first year was either Le Creuset or Il Guarni. Yikes. This is a first-year high school band director. And I remember I picked Il Guarni, and we got to work on it. And I had a couple of trombone players who were seniors. And we always had Monday night practice. And they came up to me after practice and said, Mr. Hendon, are you aware that you stopped 157 times tonight? They'd been keeping score. And I said, no, I learned more from Il Guarni than you could possibly remember. And the reason I'm mentioning this, we went to district, and Tom Bishop and Jack Williams were on the panel. I don't remember the third one. And I think we got 2 1s and a 2. And I think the 2 is from Tom Bishop. And my reaction was, what does Tom Bishop know?
Yeah.
Good grief. Did he hear the band play? And what a learning experience that was. And of course I got to know Tom and Jack. I mean, wow. I have known some real, as Sean said, icons. And what's a real awakening is now I'm one of those.
That's right.
And that's sometimes pretty hard to take and quite a responsibility.
What was it like moving from being in the classroom with kids to being executive director of the FBA, and you know, what were things that you liked about that position, or did you miss things about teaching? Just talk a little bit about that phase of your career.
Well, the thing that I missed the most, going from classroom to administrator, were the kids in the music. And I need to say most of the kids in music, because there were a few. See you later. We all have those. But one of the attitudes that I wanted to work at the most administrators are worried about numbers and money. And I didn't want that. Now, that didn't mean I was going to go out and throw money away or anything like that. But I wanted to make sure that I listened to the membership and that I propelled FBA in the direction it needed to go. And numbers and money were not what drove it. What drove it was me listening and trying to help in that sense. And did I please everybody? Probably not. Did I please a lot of people? Well, please is a strange word. Did I help a lot of people? Yes, I did. And I think one of the strongest qualities that I had in the job was listening. I would listen before I'd say a word. And a lot of times I would say, let me get back with you later today or tomorrow. And then sometimes they would calm down. I would look at it a little bit differently rather than making a snap decision. And I realize there are times when you need to make a snap decision. The thing is, you need to be as consistent as possible in making those decisions and as fair as possible. And that's what I tried to do.
What has FBA meant to you? I mean, you said since you were a school age, just starting in band, starting your involvement with FBA, but to a lot of us, FBA has meant a lot in our careers. And so what has it meant to you?
Well, I can sum that up in one word: everything. And FBA was always there, again, going back to what I said earlier, with clinics, with people helping, the marching evaluation, solo ensemble, concert, all of that. And I never said to myself or anyone else, someday I'd like to be president of FBA. Someday I'd like to be executive director. I just did my teaching job. When opportunities came along, I was district chairman 1 year or 2 years when I was at Stranahan. I did the sight reading a couple of years when I was at Coral Springs. I was on the music committee, the clinic committee. Bobby Adams called one morning and said, Duane, would like for you to run for president of FBA. You could have knocked me over. It wasn't a call I was waiting for. And when the job came open for executive director, I applied for it and got the job. I think was approved for the job in May. And June was when I retired from the classroom. Wow, it doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah.
And so 11 years I served as executive director. I loved it. And part of what I loved was not having to answer to any, well, I'm sorry, I guess I can't say that. Having to answer to the board, but not having a principal or an assistant principal or one of those people who can be a real pain. I didn't have that. I set my own hours and always worked more than what was expected of me or was in the job description, and loved it. I loved going around the state, meeting people, visiting with my friends, of which I have many. I loved it. Judging. I would encourage you to get into judging when the time is right. You become a better teacher when you become a judge.
So we'll kind of wrap up with just a few final questions. And so one of them is, you have, what's been amazing to me, and one of the things that I respect most about you is just your unjudgmental love of music. You just genuinely love music. And now that you're in retirement and enjoying time as a grandpa and just kind of standing back. What do you do in retirement to continue to have that connection to music?
Well, I announced at the last FBA meeting, district FBA meeting, that I was available to come and visit, work with your band. Amazingly enough, at Howard Middle School, Glenn Merkel took over after me and had an amazing career there. George Shannon took over 2 years ago, I think it was. And I've kind of taken him under my wing. And I'll go out and sit and listen, and he'll ask me to come conduct on his concert. I love it. I try to get to as many concerts as possible. I'm still going to clinics and still learning, which is amazing.
Do you do a lot of listening these days?
You mean like on CD and stuff like that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've got my TV set up, and it's got the classical channel, and I listen to that all the time and pop a CD in. And I mean, and I will say, music is my passion. And you've got to have that. And along with that is your love of children and love of sharing with children. And, you know, I didn't have a huge number of people who went into band directing. But I have, I'm sure, thousands of kids out there who are enjoying music because they were in the band.
And will never forget their time with you.
And never forget the time in the band. My kind of philosophy has always been, band is fun. But then, almost in the same breath, you have to define fun. And for me, fun is playing good music and playing it well.
So you've given, a lot of advice along the way to young directors, and hopefully they'll take the time to consider the things that you've said. So we don't have to go there to wrap up our conversation, but just standing here looking back on your entire career, just how would you, just to end our conversation today, just wrap up the whole thing now that you kind of are, have had time to reflect on your career and are, looking back at all the things that you accomplished?
Well, that's a tough one, because sometimes people are asked, if you had it to do over again, would you? Absolutely. And would I change anything? I do want to add one thing real quick. The statistics are out there. If you can get through your first 5 years, you stand a much better chance of staying with it. Well, probably my third or fourth year there at Stranahan, I got to wondering, is this something I want to do the rest of my life? And I went and picked up an application to the FBI. Not sure what I was thinking. And I went home, started filling out the application, and I couldn't remember what I'd done a couple of summers, so I put the application away and never looked at it again. Would I do it again or the same way? Absolutely. And what has driven me through the years, again, is my passion for music and my love of kids.
Duane, I think we all are, we've all become better people from knowing you and learning from you. So, just from me, but on behalf of directors in FBA, we thank you so much for everything that we've learned from you and your contributions to our organization. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your story with us this morning.
Well, I've had a lot of fun doing it. Thank you.